I have a good friend and fellow believer who called me one day and said, "Gene, I need to meet with you. We need to talk. I'm an alcoholic." Well, to be honest, I was surprised. I'd known this man for many years, but in retrospect, I should have picked up on his problem, although he would admit that he had become a master at deception. We met, of course, and he told me his story, and he asked forgiveness, which is a very important step in dealing with addictions. He had already asked God for forgiveness and was committed to total healing in his life and accountability. It took time, involving some very intense counseling and treatment, but my friend and brother in Christ is free from his addictive behavior. Without question, alcoholism is a very serious problem in our culture. On average, nearly 4 million people a year need treatment for substance abuse, and 2.5 million of them are alcoholics. Here's another startling statistic. Alcohol abuse is the third highest cause of death in the United States. And furthermore, we can't ignore the findings of medical science. Alcoholism has a profound impact on the entire body, especially the brain, the heart, pancreas, mouth, liver, and immune system. Needless to say, we must take these statistics and observations seriously, especially in view of the fact that most of these studies reveal that about 50% of all human beings have a genetic disposition that can lead to serious drinking. This raises an important question. Is alcoholism a sickness or sin? Today, it's often thought of as a disease. This offends some Christians. But regardless of the words that we use to define alcohol addiction, any kind of behavior that is out of God's will is sinful. In fact, most alcoholics who are really dealing with their problem will tell you up front, without hesitation, that one of their most serious actions while battling alcoholism is not telling the truth. In order to cover up their problem, they lie, even to their closest family and friends. As a pastor, I can certainly verify that this is true. I remember having a conversation with the late Pat Sumrall. A very close friend of mine and fellow elder in my church, Don Logue, who's also with Jesus, was a quarterback for Arkansas, and Pat Sumrall was his primary receiver. And because of this relationship over the years, Pat spoke at one of our men's retreats. Afterwards, I asked him about lying and its connection with alcohol, and without blinking his eyes, Pat said, "That's part of the deal. Alcoholics lie." The good news is, after years of addiction, Pat was set free. In the process of dealing with his alcoholism, he also became a Christian, which certainly facilitated the healing process. Pat's story certainly demonstrates that we can become free from addictions. Well, with these thoughts in mind, let's look more specifically at this spiritual quality of maturity Paul outlined in his letter to Timothy and to Titus, not addicted to wine. This was a common problem in the Roman world for both men and women. They consumed great quantities of wine in their pagan religious rituals, which also involved gluttony and sexual immorality. The facts are, Paul did not say that a mature Christian should never drink wine, nor did other New Testament authors. In other words, the Bible doesn't teach total abstinence, but it does teach that in certain situations it may be wise to make that choice, to abstain completely. With these thoughts in mind, please read and reflect on what I've written in this chapter, which I've entitled Being Moderate in All Things. And even if you don't agree with all of my conclusions in this chapter, I trust you'll not do what the mother did in my opening illustration, which you'll find on page 106, called An Irate Mother. You may or may not be surprised at what you read.